My name is Juan Silva, and I decided to pick Avago Technologies as the company to conduct some research on, just because I find really interesting how technology is impacting every businesses and every individual's life in the past 2 decades, and that's why I wanted to conduct some research on this company. First, I want to start with a brief description of the company. Avago Technologies is a leading designer, developer, and supplier of the broad range of analog, digital, and mixed signal. To put it in a simpler way, Avago Technologies produces wireless microchips for businesses and individuals to communicate in an easier way and have easy access to databases. Now that we just touched the description of the company, I will just describe the company. I would like to mention what industry Avago is part of. Avago Technologies is part of the semiconductor industry, um, which is pretty much the technological industry, everything that has to do with technological advances and new events coming up. The industry can be best described as a growth revenue. Um, this is just because, as mentioned before, technology has been increasing in the past years, past 2 decades, and is still expected to to keep growing just with all these applications, apps, new apps, databases coming out. Is a really interesting source. And the level of competition is really high and intense in this industry, and that's why it also makes it a good industry to conduct some. Also, as mentioned before, the acquisition of Broadcom made Avago expand and become a much bigger firm. Broadcom is a leading company in the semiconductor industry that focuses on creating microchips for tablets and smartphones, while Avago focuses on wireless communication and provides data storing for businesses, which is a little bit different. They together now form a perfect combination to tackle the whole semiconductor market. After acquiring Broadcom, it is really likely that there would be some changes in the market, the industry, and the firm itself. So let's talk about some of these changes and impacts. First, I want to talk about the impact of demand and supply after acquiring Broadcom. The supply curve of the firm will shift to the right, since now being just one firm, all the revenue and profits will go to straight one company, which is Avago. On the other hand, though, the demand curve will remain the same because consumers will be still purchasing the same amount of microchips and wireless securities. Another factor that is really important and might be affected by the acquisition of Broadcom as well is the impact on costs, such as fixed costs, variable costs, and total costs. Now, let's talk about fixed costs. Fixed costs are costs that remain the same over time, such as rent or equipment. In this case, fixed costs will decrease since the elimination of duplicates within different departments of the firms. This meaning instead of having two CEOs, the company will only have one for Avago since it's only one company. As a whole, fixed costs will be reduced. Now, let's talk about variable costs. In this particular case, the absolute variable cost of the company would increase since Avago is purchasing all those costs at the same time as purchasing Broadcom. On the other hand, when talking about average variable costs, they would remain the same. Since cost per unit in the variable, if we follow the formula for total cost, which states that total cost equals variable cost plus fixed cost, it is an assumption to say that total cost as a whole would decrease in the long run too. This is due to a reduction in fixed costs, which at the end leads to less. Now, let's compare the average fixed cost of the company before acquiring Broadcom and after it did. Let's take a look at the first picture. As we can see in the first picture, the average fixed cost line is more separated from the vertical and the horizontal axis, meaning that the average fixed costs were a little bit higher than after acquiring Broadcom. When we look at the second picture, the average fixed cost line is relatively close to the vertical and horizontal axis. This meaning that average fixed costs were reduced as a whole. Now, when taking a look at average variable cost, it can be appreciated how no change has affected it. As mentioned before, Avago acquiring Broadcom doesn't necessarily mean that more variable costs would appear in the long run. Last but not least, let's compare average total cost after and before Broadcom's acquisition. Average total cost will decrease because after the acquisition of Broadcom, fixed costs are reduced, which means a reducing total cost would be a shift to the left of the average total cost. In conclusion, it is safe to say that when a big company as Avago purchases another big company as Broadcom in the same industry, a lot of benefits could be appreciated in the long run. First, we could see it as the demand and the supply, how the supply increased, even though the demand stayed the same, which lead to more revenue and more profits at the end. And we can, it's also appreciated how costs can really be reduced in order to achieve efficiency. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.